The B-17 bomber was a massive four-engine heavy bomber used by the Allies in World War II, designed for high-altitude strategic bombing. It was capable of carrying a large payload of bombs over long distances, heavily armed with 13 machine guns around its body, and could sustain heavy damage, earning the nickname Flying Fortress. However, despite its formidable capabilities, flying on a mission in the B-17 was a terrifying, extremely dangerous, and horrifically uncomfortable experience, with each mission being a journey to hell and back, if you were lucky enough to return. Today, we will describe the dangers faced by the crews of these machines on their extremely risky, nearly suicidal missions, why it was so horrifying to fly in them, and the immense courage displayed by these crews, who often paid a high price. When the B-17 bomber appeared in World War II, it was a true marvel of technology for its time. It was significantly larger than other aircraft of the era, with greatly enhanced capabilities. But for the crew, every second spent in them was far from comfort and safety, and some of the positions in this aircraft were purely terrifying. The B-17 was designed to cruise at an altitude of 18,000 feet, but it was not a pressurized airplane. At that altitude, there is no oxygen, which means that the crew inside had to wear oxygen masks. And due to temperatures that could drop to minus 60 degrees inside the aircraft, they had to wear electric flying suits to keep warm. If a crew member was injured, the blood would literally freeze as it came out of the wound, in some cases even saving a soldier from bleeding out. Of course, it was not uncommon for these suits to malfunction or become damaged, leading crew members to experience an extremely dangerous lack of oxygen or severe frostbite. One veteran recalls how a crew member who lost oxygen flow to his mask would simply fall asleep, and if no one helped him, he would be dead within 5 minutes. They had to wear gloves because otherwise, if they touched anything with bare hands, the skin would immediately peel off. Gunners, when they had to clear a jam in the machine gun, for example, could easily lose a finger, which happened to many due to the extremely low temperatures, and many suffered from frostbite. As the B-17 was a very stable aircraft for its time, crews were taught to fly in tight formation to best protect each other from enemy fighter planes trying to intercept them. Tight formation allowed overlapping fields of fire, creating a protective box of machine guns against enemy fighters. However, B-17 crews said that the hardest part of the mission was actually getting into formation. Dozens of planes had to take off one after the other at intervals of only 30 seconds. While one was at the end of the runway, another was already starting behind it. By the way, just during the training of flying in formation, as many as 2,800 airmen were lost in accidents. Logically, the greatest danger was enemy anti-aircraft fire, but some of the crew positions in the aircraft were additionally dangerous and terrifying even when there was no enemy. We will explain this a bit more, but first, let's explain the greatest danger: German air defense. During the war, German air defenses were highly effective, and their anti-aircraft cannons and fighter pilots were responsible for many B-17s not coming back. If you know something about World War II, then you've surely heard of the German 88mm flak cannon, known for its accuracy and destructive power, used deadly effectively even against tanks. These guns could fire shells to altitudes of up to 30,000 feet, well within the cruising altitude of B-17s. These cannons were heavily concentrated around key bomber targets, such as large factories and crucial cities. Flak shells were designed to explode at a predetermined altitude and scatter shrapnel in a wide radius. A direct hit was devastating, but since the B-17 was made mainly from aluminum, even near misses could puncture the fuselage, wings, or control surfaces, causing significant damage or taking out crew. The unpredictability of flak shells created a terrible psychological pressure on crews, who never knew when they would fly into a cloud of flak and whether a shell would hit their aircraft. Airmen could see nearby planes getting hit, falling, and even exploding mid-air if bombs or fuel were hit. And seeing a friendly plane going down without any parachutes deploying was a brutal experience. And all the while, you are wondering if you are next. If that isn't enough, here comes the greater danger. German fighter pilots. German fighters, such as Messerschmitt Bf 109 and Focke-Wulf 190, were alerted by radar stations and scrambled to intercept incoming bomber formations, typically attacking in coordinated waves. They used head-on attacks to target the bomber's cockpit and engines, as well as rear and side attacks to exploit blind spots. German fighters were equipped with a mix of 20 or 30 mm cannons and 7.92 or 13 mm machine guns, which were particularly feared and could inflict severe damage on the B-17s. Initially, the Allies thought that having 13 machine guns, the B-17 was well protected against enemy fighters and did not need an escort, but this proved to be not very accurate. Early in the war, a significant problem was that Allied fighter pilots who provided escort and protection to the B-17 formation did not have the same range as the B-17 and could not escort and protect them the entire way. Later, long-range fighters like the P-51 Mustang would escort bombing missions, significantly lowering casualties. Now let's explain the crew and some of the positions on the aircraft, and then we will describe what would happen when an aircraft was hit and the fate of its crew. First, the cockpit was small and narrow with a low ceiling, requiring the crew to sometimes crawl through the aircraft. The 10 crew members wearing bulky flight suits, oxygen masks, flak vests, helmets and parachutes on a harness for quick deployment manned the plane. The average age of the crew was below 25 years and statistically, their mortality rate was about 20%, which is 50 times greater than European infantry and 10 times greater than Pacific infantry. The tail gunner, responsible for rear protection, sat basically on a sawed-off bicycle seat, half kneeling during missions in a very cramped space. Although there is no safe place in a B-17, it is said that the waist gunner position was by far the worst. They operated twin 50 caliber machine guns mounted in the waist windows on either side of the aircraft in a significantly confined space. Unlike others, they had no sitting position and stood or kneeled leaning on the machine guns to aim and fire. The waist windows were open to allow a wide field of fire, which meant that the cold was brutal. They had minimal, almost non-existent protection from enemy fire, and in the event of a collision with other aircraft or landings where the landing gear was damaged, waist gunners could be crushed to death. Then there are the top turret and the ball turret gunners, also armed with twin 50 cals. The top turret was located just behind the cockpit, providing a 360-degree view, making the gunner highly visible and a prime target for enemy fighters. As for the ball turret gunner, positioned in the ball turret located on the underside of the aircraft, the situation was additionally disturbing. The cramped and claustrophobic turret made the gunner completely separated from the crew, and exiting in a panic was a horror in itself. Besides being a prime target for enemy fighters and having their parachute in the body of the aircraft, because there was no space in the turret. Ball turrets required hydraulics to be able to align the turret door with the crew compartment. If the hydraulics were damaged, the ball turret gunner had no way to escape. There were only 2 positions where the ball gunner could exit the turret. Any other position and he would be trapped and unable to exit. This resulted in many ball gunners being unable to escape destroyed aircraft and being stuck inside until it hit the ground or burned to death. In case of landing gear failure, if the turret gunner did not exit, he would be crushed by the weight of the aircraft and literally smeared across the runway, which did happen. Besides the previously mentioned crew members, the B-17 flying fortress included pilot, co-pilot, navigator, bombardier, and radio operator, all working in perfect synchronization. But what happens when the plane is hit? If still relatively flyable, the crew would quickly assess the damage and make a decision on what next. The preferred option was to try to maintain control and try to return to base or at least to friendly lines and crash land there, but many of them fell into the sea, never making it back. Some even made it back on 2 out of 4 engines, which was not designed to fly at all. If critically damaged, the pilot would give a signal to bail out. The crew would grab and prepare their parachutes and head for the nearest exit, helping each other to try to save everyone. If they parachuted over enemy territory, they were generally captured. And in the Pacific, captured airmen suffered terrible fates, and many died in the worst ways in captivity. Falling into the sea would be lethal unless they were quickly found and rescued. Air-sea rescue operations were conducted, but not all downed airmen were found in time. However, many experienced direct hits, activating fuel and bombs, or were simply so badly damaged that they would fall so rapidly that the crew would not even have a chance to leave the aircraft. If you are interested in more, in future videos we can cover these missions of exceptionally brave airmen in more detail.